Hello, this lecture is an introduction to the California Law and Ethics exam. So let's begin really basic. What is the exam? What is this law and ethics exam that we keep hearing about? In the state of California, the law and ethics exam consists of 50 scored questions that are multiple choice and 25 pre-test questions that are not scored, but are used to test questions for the next assessment cycle. You have a total of 90 minutes to complete the law and ethics exam. It is completely computerized, so it's done on a computer at a testing site, allowing you to go back and forth between questions as well as mark questions for review at the end. In terms of the content on the exam, it's split into law and ethics, obviously. So the law section is roughly 40% of the exam, and the ethics section is 60% of the exam. This makes sense given that there aren't as many laws that govern MFT practice as there are ethical codes and standards. So you can assume that much of the exam will involve you deciding what to do with various different ethical dilemmas. This means that this exam is not one of those exams where you're going to answer the question and feel super confident about the answer most of the time. Instead, most of the time, most of the answers are going to seem reasonable and like they could be good answers, and you're going to have to pick the best one and kind of be comfortable with a bit of ambiguity and uncertainty. We'll have a lot of practice in the class with these types of questions so you can get comfortable with this feeling, with this type of question, and different strategies to help narrow your choices down. So that's to come. But I've also provided a link at the bottom of this slide here that'll take you to a handbook that provides you with more detail, a more detailed outline of the content areas for the exam if you're interested. So how do you go about taking and, how do you go about registering for the exam when you're ready to take it? Well, you can't take the law and ethics exam until you graduate with your master's degree and you register as an AMFT, an Associate Marriage and Family Therapist. So once you graduate, you will submit your paperwork to register as an Associate Marriage and Family Therapist. Once you receive your registration number, then you become eligible to apply to take the law and ethics exam. So you would submit a request for the initial law and ethics exam, and I provided a link there, and pay a fee. And then the BBS will approve you to take the exam, and you'll schedule the exam with a proctor called Pearson VUE, and there's the link there for that. And that's where you would actually make the appointment to go take the exam. And there is a fee for that as well. How can you study? Well, it's recommended, first of all, by most folks that you register for the exam before you start studying. Otherwise, you might find yourself studying and getting unsure of yourself and never setting a date to take the exam, and before you know it, your year is up. So it's helpful to register, set a date, and now you have a deadline to work toward, and you can be a bit more motivated to study. Also, during your time as a grad student, especially in this class, it's helpful that you begin to take notes of what you learn in the class so that you can then use them as a study guide. It's also helpful to start to pay attention, if you haven't already, to your learning style. Some people prefer to study for long stretches of time, say 3 hours and then be done for the day, while others prefer shorter bursts of time, like 15 to 20 minutes with several breaks in between. So figuring out what that study style is for you can be helpful for when you start to study for this exam. At the same time, it can be helpful for you to figure out if you prefer learning by listening through audio, by watching something, by having face-to-face instruction, by reading, figuring out what that is for you so that that can help you to find out what kind of study materials to seek out. There are lots of different study programs that you can use when you're studying for the exam. I've listed a couple of them here. The Therapist Development Center, Ben Caldwell Lab Study Guides, and Jerry Grossman seminars. They all vary in terms of their approach, their style, their length, their pricing. I can't provide a recommendation for you per se, because I've only had experience with one, but you can Google them and look for more information on them if you're interested. Okay, so let's assume you've registered as an AMFT, you've signed up to take the exam, you picked a date, you've studied, and now it's time to go and take your exam. What should you expect? First off, I recommend that you arrive or aim to arrive 30 minutes early, just in case you get lost or you can't find the room, and more importantly, to allow you to check in with plenty of time. When you arrive at the testing site, they'll have you place all of your belongings into a locker except for your IDs. So it's best that you not bring anything with you other than your IDs and your car keys if you drove there. You will need to bring 2 forms of ID, and there's a list of acceptable IDs on the Pearson VUE website. They'll check and confirm your identity with the IDs, and then you will have your palm scanned using palm vein recognition technology as another security measure. Once that is done and it's time for you to begin your exam, you'll be asked to turn out your pockets to make sure you don't have anything with you. And in some locations, to lift up the cuff of your pants or your sleeves so that they can see that you don't have anything that you're concealing. You'll then be escorted into the testing room and seated in front of a computer, and that's where you will take your exam. There'll be a tutorial on the computer to orient you to how you're going to select answers on the exam, and that's not part of your 90 minutes. But once you finish the tutorial, you will start the exam, and that is part of the 90 minutes. In most testing sites, you are seated with blockers or barriers on the sides here and a camera that is facing you to make sure that you aren't cheating on the exam. If you need to step out to use the restroom, for example, you are permitted to do that, but your 90-minute timer does not stop. And when you come back to re-enter the testing room, your palm has to be rescanned. So all of that needs to be factored into your timing, and we'll cut into the 90 minutes, of course. Now, the most important question, the one that you're thinking of, is how do you pass? How can I pass the exam? Well, the passing score itself changes with each assessment cycle. The VBS used to post passing scores, but doesn't anymore. Historically, they hover around 67 to 70%, so a 35 out of 50 is passing on average. Remember, the 25 pretest questions that are included don't count towards your score. So you're going to do more than 50 questions. You're going to do 75 questions, but only the 50 that are actually part of the test will be factored into your score. And there's no way of knowing which is which. Roughly 70% of folks that go to take the law and ethics exam pass on the first attempt. So what happens after you pass? First off, celebrate. This test brings a lot of anxiety to a lot of folks and can be challenging because of all of the ethical dilemmas that you have to work through in the exam. So definitely celebrate. You will continue to accumulate your 3,000 hours, assuming that you haven't finished yet. And once you complete your 3,000 hours, you can then register for the California clinical exam. And that's done in very much the similar way to registering for the law and ethics exam. But you'll register, take that exam, pass it, and then you can be eligible for a license. What happens if you don't pass? First off, don't be discouraged. It happens. It's a challenging exam. You will need to retake it, obviously. So what you'll need to do is wait for a notice of eligibility for re-examination, which takes approximately 90 days, depending on when in the assessment cycle you took the exam initially. And this basically is done to ensure that you don't take the same version of the exam again. So you're going to take a completely different version of the exam. Before you can register for re-examination, you'll need to complete a 12-hour law and ethics course, pay a $100 retake fee, and then you can register and retake it. And you can retake the law and ethics exam up to 4 times in 1 year. And remember that you cannot pass on to the clinical exam until you have passed the law and ethics exam. Something else to keep in mind, you will not be able to obtain a subsequent renewal of your AMFT registration without passing the law and ethics exam. So what that means is you'll be able to renew the first time, your first year, even if you haven't passed the exam, the law and ethics exam. But when you come to your second year and you're attempting to renew again for the second time, you cannot renew until you pass the law and ethics exam. So you'll complete that 12-hour course again and then retake it until you pass. What that means is that you cannot continue to practice until you pass the exam in these cases because your registration will not be renewed. That's not going to happen because you're going to pass. So what kind of questions can you expect to see? Well, I have a sample question here that we're going to go through together. And these are the types of questions that you can expect to see for those 75 questions in the law and ethics exam. So a therapist begins treatment with a couple. During the intake, the wife discloses that her husband can get very angry and hit her while the children are around. She also mentioned that their son has tried to protect his mother and get in between the husband and wife, causing the son to get hurt at times. The therapist hasn't experienced many domestic violence clients in his time as a therapist and is feeling unsure of how to handle working with this couple. He should legally respond by, and the answer choices are A, referring the husband to an anger management group and creating a safety plan with the wife and son if it happens again. B, consulting with supervisor or colleague that specializes in domestic violence. C, call CPS and make a mandated report for the abuse the son encountered and process it with the parents. D, continue to see the couple as long as they sign a no-harm contract. So I'm going to pause for a minute so that you can select your answer, and then we'll go over the correct one. Okay, so the first thing I want to bring your attention to is that this question asks how you should legally respond. So that means you're looking for an answer that addresses a legal requirement. And knowing this and paying attention to this helps you to cross out a couple of these answers, which on the surface all seem like good answers. So A, referring the husband to anger management and creating a safety plan, that sounds like it could be a good plan. But it's not regulated by the law. There's no law that says you need to refer perpetrators of violence to an anger management group or to create a safety plan. Also, this isn't addressing a legal responsibility that you do have, which I'll get to in a minute. So this answer can be crossed out. B, consult with a supervisor or colleague that specializes in domestic violence. Again, there's no law that says consultation is required. So this one also not addressing the law and not addressing the legal mandate that we have. C, call CPS and make a mandated report is legal, a legal requirement. We have a suspected case of child abuse here where the son got in between the mother and her husband and has gotten hurt. So this is a mandated child abuse report, which is regulated by the law. So answer C is addressing our legal requirement and addressing the imminent risk of a suspected child abuse report. So this looks like a good answer. Now let's look at D just to make sure. D, continue to see the couple as long as they sign a no-harm contract. This answer is very problematic for several reasons. One, it doesn't address any legal requirement. There's nothing that says in the law that you need to continue to see a couple or not see a couple. The law is not that specific. Secondly, this answer does not address the legal requirement of reporting the abuse. And third, seeing a couple when there's active domestic violence is contraindicated in therapy. So this would not be a good idea. So D is definitely not the answer. So this leaves us with C being the correct answer that addresses how this particular therapist should respond legally to this scenario by making a mandated child abuse report for the domestic violence that has caused the son to be harmed. Now, after this is done, you could proceed forward with some of the other things like consulting with a supervisor or colleague about DV, but the best answer in this case is C.